The palace was never meant to tremble. But on one extraordinary night, the walls of tradition shook to their core. A sealed document hidden for years was finally opened. And what it revealed didn't just surprise the royal household, it detonated it. A queen's final decision, a name no one expected, and a protocol that would be shattered before dawn. This was not succession as usual. This was a silent revolution. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Inside a private chamber thick with anticipation, the final will of Queen Elizabeth II was placed on the table with almost ceremonial gravity. Only a handful of senior royals were present, bound not just by blood, but by the burden of history. They had gathered, expecting clarity about estates, heirlooms, perhaps quiet instructions about patronages. What they encountered instead was something far more consequential. As the document was read aloud, each carefully measured word seemed to land heavier than the last. Then came the line that changed everything. In unmistakable language, the Queen entrusted a powerful strand of legacy authority, not to Queen Camilla, but to Catherine, Princess of Wales. It was not merely symbolic, it was strategic. It reshaped the internal balance of influence in a way no one had prepared for. The silence that followed was not confusion, it was recognition. Everyone in that room understood what this meant. For decades, the hierarchy had been carefully choreographed, every gesture measured, every role defined by precedent. And now, in a single clause, that hierarchy had shifted. Catherine's name, written in the Queen's own directive, carried the weight of intention. It suggested continuity, yes, but also preference, a quiet endorsement that reached beyond public ceremony and into the private architecture of power. Palace advisors exchanged restrained glances, already calculating implications. Was this ceremonial acknowledgement a gesture of affection, or was it a transfer of influence that would echo through council meetings and strategic decisions for years to come? While others processed the shock, Princess Anne did not hesitate. Her reaction was not dramatic, not emotional, but resolute. For a woman known as the monarchy's most disciplined guardian of protocol, this moment did not invite doubt. It demanded action. Anne understood her mother's language better than anyone in that chamber. The Queen had never wasted words. If Catherine was named, it was deliberate. If Camilla was omitted from that sphere of authority, it was intentional. And Anne, bound by loyalty not only to the crown but to her mother's final wishes, felt the weight of obligation settle heavily on her shoulders. Advisors quickly began parsing legal phrasing, questioning whether the clause altered established dynamics or merely added nuance. Some argued it could be contained within private tradition. Others warned that ignoring it would risk undermining the Queen's last directive. But Anne's mind was already moving ahead. She knew that silence could be interpreted as hesitation, and hesitation in a monarchy breeds instability. To protect the institution, she would need to act before speculation took root. And that action, she understood, would not sit comfortably within centuries-old royal protocol. It would step beyond it. Before dawn, a decision would be made that could not be undone, a move that would signal to the palace, and eventually the world, that the Queen's final word would not be quietly filed away. But what exactly did the Queen's final words say, and why would they force the most disciplined royal in history to defy the very rules she lived by? Buried beneath legal language and regal formalities was a single clause, short, precise, and explosive. It wasn't about jewels, it wasn't about estates, it was about influence, the kind of influence that shapes the future of a monarchy. And when Princess Anne read it aloud, even the most seasoned courtiers felt the ground shift beneath them. The words were not dramatic in tone, yet their meaning thundered through the chamber. The clause granted Catherine, Princess of Wales, formal oversight of a private royal trust, long understood to operate in quiet alignment with the Queen Consort's sphere. For decades, that trust had symbolized more than charitable direction. It represented moral stewardship, subtle guidance over which causes would define the crown's conscience. It was never publicly debated because it was never publicly threatened. Until now. By placing Catherine at its helm, the late Queen Elizabeth II had done something astonishing. She had drawn a line toward the future and placed her confidence unmistakably in one woman. There was no elaborate explanation attached, no justification, just clarity. Catherine's authority within that trust would not be ceremonial. It would be strategic. Decisions about legacy projects, patronages, and long-term philanthropic direction would flow through her oversight. That elevation carried symbolic force far beyond paperwork. It suggested that the Queen saw in Catherine not simply a future consort, but the moral and stabilizing heir to her own vision of monarchy. The message was subtle, yet impossible to ignore. Continuity would not merely be inherited, it would be guided. What made the revelation sharper still was absence. In the critical passages outlining legacy authority, the name of Queen Camilla did not appear, not once. For those seated around the table, that omission was louder than any accusation. It did not strip Camilla of her title or standing, but it quietly redirected a channel of influence that had traditionally gravitated toward the reigning queen consort. The silence around her name felt deliberate, intentional, almost surgical in its precision. And in monarchies, precision is rarely accidental. Legal advisors shifted uneasily, their minds racing through precedent and interpretation. Did a private will override custom? Could symbolic authority reshape internal hierarchy without formal proclamation? Some argued that royal tradition thrives on flexibility, that informal customs bend under the sovereign's will. Others cautioned that disrupting established alignment between king and queen consort risked signaling division at the very top. The debate remained hushed, but urgent, because beneath every technical argument lay a deeper question. Was this the Queen's final recalibration of power before she left the stage? Princess Anne did not participate in the debate. She listened, she absorbed, and then she reached a conclusion that was both personal and unyielding. She knew her mother's temperament better than any advisor in that room. The Queen did not leave loose threads. If she assigned Catherine oversight of this trust, it was not a suggestion, it was a directive wrapped in calm language. To Anne, the clause was not open to negotiation. It was a message clear, deliberate, and irrevocable. But clarity does not eliminate consequence. Anne understood that honoring this directive would not exist in a vacuum. The reigning king's household, with its own established rhythm and loyalties, would feel the tremor. To act without deference to that structure would be interpreted as defiance. Yet to hesitate would risk diluting her mother's final instruction. And in that narrowing space between protocol and conviction, Anne realized something sobering. Upholding this clause would require more than quiet agreement. It would demand courage. It would demand disruption. And if honoring her mother's will meant confronting the present throne itself, Anne was prepared to take that risk. Princess Anne has never chased the spotlight. She has chased duty. But on this day, duty demanded rebellion. Bound by loyalty to her late mother and unwavering belief in the crown's survival, Anne faced a choice that could fracture the royal household. Follow protocol or protect the monarchy's future, as the Queen had quietly defined it. For decades, Princess Anne had been the monarchy's most disciplined guardian of order. She lived by the rules others occasionally bent. She honored precedents even when it cost her personal comfort. While headlines favored glamour and controversy, Anne built her identity on steadiness, restraint, and relentless commitment. If anyone embodied the machinery of tradition, it was her. That reputation is precisely what made this moment so seismic. Because when the Queen's final will elevated Catherine, Princess of Wales, in a way that subtly reshaped influence, Anne understood the weight of what she held in her hands. This was not a minor adjustment tucked inside legal language. It was her mother's final written wish, and to Anne, that was sacred. The late Queen Elizabeth II had guided the crown through decades of turbulence with composure and clarity. Her decisions were never impulsive. If she entrusted Catherine with oversight that traditionally gravitated toward the Queen Consort's domain, it was intentional. Anne felt that certainty deep in her bones. Yet certainty did not erase consequence. To act on this clause meant stepping beyond the invisible line that separated loyalty from insubordination. Advisors cautioned restraint. They urged patience. They insisted the palace should craft a unified response, BF, or any acknowledgement reached the public sphere. There was a chain of command, they reminded her. A reigning monarch, a carefully balanced household. To move ahead independently, even symbolically, risked appearing confrontational. It risked implying division at the very summit of the institution. But Anne's mind was already settled. Protocol, in her view, was not a shield for indecision. It was a framework designed to protect the crown's integrity. And integrity demanded clarity. In a measured yet unmistakable gesture, Anne chose to publicly recognize Catherine's newly defined authority before any official palace briefing could dilute it. There were no fireworks, no dramatic declaration, just a deliberate acknowledgement that reverberated through corridors accustomed to hierarchy. In that moment, Anne was not rebelling against the monarchy. She was defending it as she believed her mother intended. Protocol exists to serve the crown, not silence it. That conviction guided her step across a boundary she had respected her entire life. The emotional toll of that choice did not show on her face, but it pressed heavily against her resolve. She knew how this would be interpreted. Some would call it loyalty, others would whisper the word defiance. And somewhere within the king's inner circle, questions would begin forming about timing, about intention, about allegiance. Anne was fully aware that by honoring her mother's directive so swiftly, she had forced the palace into a new reality, one where Catherine's position was not quietly absorbed, but visibly affirmed. There would be reactions. There would be private conversations, thick with tension. Anne did not fear confrontation, but she understood its cost. Still, she had chosen her side not against anyone, but in favor of what she believed was the crown's long-term stability. And that belief, once acted upon, could not be wrecked. The ripple had begun, subtle yet unstoppable. And when word reached the king's private office, the silence that followed was far more dangerous than outrage. A monarch cannot afford surprise. Yet this was one he never anticipated. As King Charles III absorbed the implications of his mother's will and his sister's bold move, he faced a crisis that was deeply personal. This was not just about titles. It was about trust, about loyalty, and about two women standing at the center of the crown's future. For Charles, the weight of the moment pressed from every direction. His mother's final written authority carried moral force that could not simply be brushed aside. The late Queen Elizabeth II had shaped the modern monarchy with steady precision, and her last directive was not a casual footnote. Yet as sovereign, Charles now bore responsibility for unity within his own household. At the heart of that household stood Queen Camilla, a woman who had endured decades of scrutiny before earning her place beside him. To see a channel of influence subtly redirected toward Catherine, Princess of Wales, was not merely procedural, it struck at the fragile balance he had fought to establish. Private conversations began almost immediately. Senior advisors gathered in tight circles, their words measured, but their expressions strained. Some argued that the Queen's will must be honored publicly to avoid appearing dismissive of her legacy. Others warned that amplifying the clause could be interpreted as diminishing Camilla's standing. The fear was not legal confusion, it was perception. If the public sensed division at the very top, confidence in the crown could fracture. The monarchy thrives on continuity, not visible recalibration. And now, recalibration was exactly what the situation demanded. Charles found himself pulled between two loyalties that refused to coexist peacefully. On Ney's side stood legacy, his mother's carefully chosen words, imbued with decades of wisdom and authority. On the other stood partnership, his commitment to Camilla, whose journey to acceptance had been long and bruising. To disregard the clause would risk dishonoring his mother's final intent. To elevate it too boldly might suggest his queen consort required correction. The tension was quiet but profound. This was not a battle of egos. It was a collision of obligations. Complicating matters further was Princess Anne's refusal to soften her acknowledgement. She did not grandstand, but she did not retreat. Her public recognition of Catherine's authority had already shifted the narrative beyond internal deliberation. That gesture, calm and deliberate, made reversal nearly impossible without appearing punitive. Anne's stance carried the moral undertone of filial duty. Challenging it would mean challenging not only her, but the implied sanctity of the Queen's final directive. Draft statements were prepared with surgical care. Language was weighed for nuance, every phrase designed to project unity while absorbing shock. The goal was reassurance, continuity, stability. Yet even as drafts circulated, something else was happening beyond official wording. Catherine remained silent. She did not comment. She did not clarify. She did not step forward or step back. And in that silence, a new kind of authority began to take shape. Her restraint suggested confidence rather than uncertainty. It implied readiness rather than hesitation. The absence of protest from her corner only amplified the clause's power. Charles understood that whatever response emerged would define not only this moment, but the tone of his reign. To lean too heavily in any direction would create ripples that could not easily be contained. The monarchy had weathered storms before, but this storm was internal, intimate, threaded through family bonds and public expectation alike. And as advisors finalized carefully balanced words, the truth was already adjusting itself in subtle ways. Because while the palace crafted statements, Catherine was already stepping into a role no one officially announced, but everyone could see. She didn't demand it. She didn't celebrate it. She simply accepted it with the calm composure that had defined her journey from commoner to future queen. But this was different. This wasn't expectation. This was selection. And as Catherine began subtly embodying the authority granted to her, the royal landscape shifted in ways no decree could fully contain. For years, Catherine, Princess of Wales, had prepared for a destiny everyone assumed would one day arrive. She had endured scrutiny, mastered restraint, and learned the quiet art of influence without overt command. Her evolution from university student to senior royal was not marked by rebellion, but by patience. She studied the rhythms of the institution. She listened more than she spoke. She built credibility not through spectacle, but through consistency. Yet nothing in that long preparation compared to the gravity of being named privately and deliberately by the late Queen Elizabeth II in a document meant to outlive them all. This was no public endorsement, no ceremonial blessing delivered on a balcony. It was quieter, more intimate, and therefore more powerful. To be entrusted with oversight tied to the Queen's moral legacy signaled something profound. It suggested continuity of values, a passing of internal confidence that transcended formal titles. Catherine understood the symbolism instantly. She did not need to announce it. The palace understood it. The courtiers understood it. Even those who felt unsettled by it understood it. The changes that followed were almost imperceptible at first. A shift in seating at private briefings. A subtle adjustment in who received preliminary reports before decisions were finalized. Invitations to consultations that once followed a predictable hierarchy now included her earlier, more centrally. None of it was dramatic enough to provoke headlines. But inside the institution, nuance is everything. These adjustments carried meaning. They whispered of recalibration. They hinted that influence was moving along new channels. Catherine's engagement with charities historically linked to the Queen deepened as well. Causes that once bore Elizabeth's steady imprint began to reflect Catherine's thoughtful emphasis. She approached them not as inherited obligations, but as living commitments. The continuity felt intentional, almost seamless, as if the Queen's legacy had found its natural successor. Supporters noticed. Public admiration surged, fueled not by grand declarations, but by visible steadiness. The narrative forming beyond palace walls painted her as the future, not just in title, but in temperament. Legitimacy, once anticipated, now felt confirmed. And yet, beneath that rising tide of approval, currents of discomfort stirred. Queen Camilla remained dignified, publicly unshaken. But those loyal to her position could not ignore the symbolism embedded in the will. Influence traditionally orbiting the Queen Consort had been subtly redirected. In private conversations, questions were raised. Was this an erosion of standing, a strategic pivot orchestrated too quietly to challenge openly. The palace maintained composure, but composure does not eliminate tension. Catherine herself did nothing to inflame it. Her silence was deliberate. She neither flaunted authority nor diminished it. That restraint made her presence stronger. She appeared neither triumphant nor tentative, simply prepared. And in that preparation, why both admiration and apprehension. Because when power shifts gently, it often shifts permanently. Those who felt secure under the old alignment began to reconsider their footing. The monarchy had not fractured, but it had tilted, and in the shadows of palace corridors, resistance was already forming. No crown is worn without scars, and no queen steps aside without consequence. Though no public protest emerged, insiders sensed a shift measured, restrained, but unmistakable. Camilla had spent decades securing her place beside the throne. Now, one private clause threatened to redraw the balance she had fought to maintain. Queen Camilla's path to acceptance was never smooth. For years she endured public skepticism, harsh headlines, and whispered doubt about whether she could ever truly belong within the monarchy's inner sanctum. She survived it, not by confrontation, but by persistence. She embraced duty. She supported her husband without theatrics. Gradually, resistance softened. Over time, her presence beside King Charles III became less controversial and more institutional. That transformation was hard-earned. It was built on endurance, and precisely because it had been so difficult, any suggestion of diminished influence cut deeper than protocol alone. The clause in the late Queen Elizabeth II's will did not remove Camilla from her role. It did something subtler. It shifted a sphere of legacy authority toward Catherine, Princess of Wales, a sphere traditionally aligned with the Queen Consort's moral and charitable influence. To some within Camilla's circle, this was not a minor redistribution. It was an erosion of hierarchy. They argued that the established order placed the Queen Consort at the symbolic center of certain trusts and initiatives. Reassigning that influence, even privately, risked creating a dual axis of power. And duality at the top invites instability. Conversations began quietly. Senior aides loyal to Camilla met behind closed doors, their tones cautious but urgent. No one spoke of open resistance. That would have been reckless. Instead, discussions focused on interpretation. Could the clause be framed as complementary rather than competitive? Could Catherine's oversight be described as transitional, a bridge rather than a replacement? Every word mattered, because in monarchies, perception often outweighs decree. If the public sensed displacement, the damage would extend far beyond private discomfort. Camilla herself maintained composure. She appeared in engagements with the same measured grace she had cultivated over years of rehabilitation. Yet beneath that poise lay a complex emotional current. Was this humiliation, or was it another trial to endure? Those closest to her sensed the strain. Not anger, something quieter, a calculation. She understood that reacting impulsively would only strengthen the narrative of division. Dignity, therefore, became her shield. Subtle diplomatic gestures followed, increased visibility at key engagements, carefully curated appearances that reaffirmed her active partnership with the king. These were not dramatic moves. They were strategic signals. The palace outwardly projected unity, but unity under pressure can feel fragile. Camilla's supporters watched closely as Catherine's quiet authority expanded. Seating arrangements, consultations, the flow of briefings, small shifts that collectively told a larger story. To some, it looked like evolution. To others, it felt like encroachment. And at the center of it all stood Charles, balancing affection, obligation, and the relentless need for cohesion. What made the tension more volatile was its invisibility. No speeches, no statements of protest, just controlled expressions and guarded meetings. The conflict remained internal, confined to corridors and confidential conversations. But silence does not equal resolution. It often signals preparation. Because once a story like this escapes the palace walls, it rarely returns unchanged. But when the story inevitably reached the public sphere, the monarchy's carefully controlled image would face its greatest test. The moment whispers became headlines, the monarchy entered uncharted territory. Queen's will favors Catherine. Princess Anne defies protocol. The narrative was no longer private, it was viral. And in the age of relentless media scrutiny, perception can be more powerful than policy. The crown was no longer managing tradition, it was managing momentum. Once the story broke, it spread with astonishing speed. Commentators dissected every line of the late Queen Elizabeth II's will as though it were a manifesto rather than a private directive. News panels framed Princess Anne as the unwavering guardian of her mother's legacy, a royal soldier willing to step beyond convention to protect the crown's future. The narrative cast her not as rebellious, but as resolute. That framing carried weight. It elevated her decision from procedural irregularity to moral stand. And once that tone took hold, it reshaped the entire conversation. Public reaction surged swiftly in favor of Catherine, Princess of Wales. Polls reflected growing support for her perceived legitimacy, with many interpreting the Queen's clause as a quiet endorsement of the monarchy's next chapter. Online platforms amplified praise for her composure and preparation. Comment sections filled with declarations that she represented stability, continuity, and renewal. The emotional current was undeniable. Catherine was no longer seen merely as the future by default. She was being framed as the chosen custodian of Elizabeth's values. And in a monarchy built on symbolism, that distinction mattered profoundly. But admiration for one figure often casts shadow on another. Questions began surfacing about Queen Camilla's standing. Had she been sidelined? Was the clause a subtle recalibration of influence at her expense? Commentators debated whether this represented a shift in hierarchy or simply a redistribution of responsibility. The nuance was lost in some corners, sharpened in others. For Camilla's supporters, the conversation felt uncomfortably pointed. For critics, it felt overdue. The monarchy's internal tension had become a public spectacle, filtered through opinion and speculation. Royal historians entered the debate with measured caution. Some argued that sovereigns have always exercised discretion in shaping influence through private trusts and patronages. They insisted this was precedent in action, not revolution. Others countered that the symbolic implications were unprecedented in modern times. By naming Catherine so explicitly, the Queen had inserted her voice into a delicate transition of power. Was this continuity or quiet correction? The experts disagreed, and disagreement broadcast relentlessly only intensified curiosity. Younger generations rallied behind Catherine with striking enthusiasm. To them, she represented a modern monarchy, grounded yet forward-looking. Social media narratives framed her as relatable, disciplined, and aligned with contemporary values. In that digital arena, symbolism translated instantly into identity. The story was no longer confined to legal interpretation. It became generational, it became emotional, it became personal. Within palace walls, concern deepened. Momentum, once unleashed, is difficult to guide. If the institution formally embraced the shift, it risked amplifying perceived imbalance. If it attempted to contain it, it risked appearing resistant to the Queen's final intention. Draft statements were weighed, delayed, revised. Every phrase carried consequence. The Crown stood at a crossroads not of law, but of optics. And optics in the modern era can shape legacy as powerfully as decree. As headlines continued to multiply and public opinion hardened into camps of admiration and apprehension, one truth grew impossible to ignore. Silence was no longer neutral. A decision would soon be required, visible, deliberate, and defining. And as momentum built beyond palace walls, a final decision loomed that could either seal unity or confirm division. Royal protocol was designed to endure wars, scandals, and abdications, but it was never meant to withstand quiet rebellion from within. Princess Anne's decision to act on her mother's final wish did more than elevate Catherine. It redefined loyalty. It redefined authority. And it forced the monarchy to confront a truth long buried beneath ceremony. Survival sometimes demands disruption. What began as a clause in a sealed will had now become a defining chapter in the reign of King Charles III. The moment of reckoning arrived not with thunder, but with intention. In a carefully calibrated public appearance, Princess Anne offered formal acknowledgement of Catherine, Princess of Wales's expanded role, not as an act of defiance, but as fulfillment of her mother's final directive. The gesture was subtle, yet unmistakable. It signalled continuity with the late Queen Elizabeth II's vision. It affirmed that her words would not fade quietly into archival obscurity. In that single moment, Anne anchored legacy to action. The palace could no longer delay. The king, measured and deliberate, eventually acknowledged the authority embedded within the will. His response did not dramatize the shift. It contextualized it. By framing the clause as an extension of the Queen's enduring guidance, he diffused speculation of internal fracture. Yet behind that composure lay recognition. The monarchy had adjusted, not abruptly, not chaotically, but undeniably. Charles's acknowledgement was both acceptance and strategy, preserving unity while honoring his mother's intent. It was a delicate balancing act between past and present, between affection and obligation. To reinforce cohesion, a display of unity followed. Appearances were coordinated. Engagements were shared. The message was unmistakable. The crown stands together. Cameras captured harmony, and statements emphasized collective purpose. But observers who had followed the unfolding drama understood that something fundamental had shifted beneath the surface. Unity was no longer assumed. It was actively demonstrated. The monarchy had learned that silence in the modern age invites suspicion. Visibility, even carefully curated, became reassurance. Through it all, Queen Camilla maintained her composure. She did not contest the clause. She did not retreat. Yet, the recalibration of influence was visible to those attuned to nuance. Certain responsibilities flowed along new channels. Consultations broadened. Symbolism aligned differently. Camilla's dignity remained intact, but her sphere adjusted subtly, strategically. It was not humiliation, it was adaptation. And adaptation, within monarchy, can be as powerful as resistance. For Catherine, the transformation felt almost seamless. There was no proclamation declaring her ascendancy, no headline announcing a new order. Instead, her role solidified through continuity, through steadiness, through the unmistakable weight of the Queen's final endorsement. Legacy, not ambition, carried her forward. That distinction shaped public perception. She appeared neither triumphant nor triumphant over anyone simply entrusted. And trust, once bestowed by a sovereign of Elizabeth's stature, carries enduring force. Yet as calm returned to the palace corridors, a lingering question refused to settle. If one carefully crafted clause could redirect influence and test loyalties, what else might lie sealed within the Queen's private instructions? Monarchies thrive on controlled revelation, but revelation, once begun, has a habit of uncovering more than intended. The Crown survived this disruption. It may even have strengthened through it. But beneath the restored composure lingered the sense that history had not fully finished speaking. Because if one hidden clause could reshape the Crown, the question remains, what else did the Queen quietly set in motion before she said goodbye? Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.